What are the total equivalent units for direct materials? Assuming we have 8,200 units that were in the beginning inventory, 34,500 were started, 30,000 were complete, 12,700 were in ending inventories. Direct materials were added at the beginning of the process. What information do we need to calculate this number? What are the total equivalent units for direct materials? Well, what we want to do is consider that 30,000 was completed. And to that number, we want to also consider that the materials were added throughout the beginning of the process. So we want to take that 12,700 that's in that WIP ending inventory and add those together, so we get 42,700. So our equivalent units for direct materials is 42,700. This next question, it takes a tremendous amount of time to work through, but I want to do it in the video because I think it would make it much clearer when you're confronted with the question or the questions. It may very well be a question that has multiple parts. So my job will be to help you decipher what information you need and then use that information to answer various types of questions. Given that Sunrise Corporation has the materials added at the beginning of the process and the conversion costs are evenly applied, we want to compute what is the total cost of units remaining in work in process. To do this, we've got to do a number of computations. And for me, I thought maybe if we did it in different stages, it might be easier to grasp. Okay, so we have all this data, and using the data, we want to first calculate the equivalent units as it relates to conversion costs. To do that, we have to deal with it in the units first. So the ending WIP in units is 23,000. And we know the equivalent conversion cost in WIP is 60%. So we're going to start with our equivalent units in conversion costs of 23,000 units multiplied by 60%. So we come up with 13,008. Let's leave that to the side for a minute and continue with our computations. So now that we know our equivalent units, we are in a position to determine what are our total units for conversion costs. So if we take the number that we've just calculated, which is our equivalent units for our work in process for conversion costs, which is 13,800, we can go to our spreadsheet here, and it says conversion cost is the ones that completed and transfer out is 116,700 units. So taking these two numbers together, we come up to our total equivalent units for conversion costs, the 13,800, which we've calculated here, and the completed units transfer out. So our number here now is 130,500. And again, we're going to compute these numbers and we'll use them later, but first let's compute them. Second, we want to also calculate our conversion cost, in dollars, because now we did in units, so let's do it in dollars. If we take our beginning WIP inventory, and we're given this here, our beginning WIP inventory on conversion cost is 22,500. We want to take that cost of conversion cost added in the month, and based on the information provided is 271,125. See here. Adding them two together, we come to 293,625. So now we are in the best position to compute our cost per equivalent unit based on conversion cost, because now we're going to take our 293,625 and divide it into our equivalent units of 130,500, and we get a $2.25. And we're going to use this information in just a second, but let's continue on our process. Let's think about how to compute our material costs. We have already been given our material costs in work in process, and that's given here, 35,000. And we've also given our number in our the total cost of materials added in the month of $384,100. So just adding those two together gives us our total material to account for in dollars. Very important information. But then we have to compute our equivalent units. So since we are given some information, we want to first find out what is our ending WIP in units. We already know it's 23,000. And our units that are completed and transfer out, we were given also was 116,700, as you can see here. So now we have the 23,000 and the 116. So we have our total equivalent units to account for. Now that we have our dollar amount, 419,100, and our units of 139,700, we can divide those two together to come up to our cost per equivalent unit in materials. And again, let's put that to the side for a second and think about what we've done. We have accumulated our total units to account for in conversion units and our total units to account for in our materials. And we were able to successfully compute our cost per equivalent unit based on materials and our conversion costs. So now we can take this information and start to compute our two numbers that we need to complete our cost and ending WIP. First, our material costs, which is going to be our rate. And again, we calculated this rate at $3. So taking our $3 rate and multiply by the number of units at ending inventory, we get 69,000. Then we're going to take our cost per equivalent unit, which is again taking the $2.25, which is our cost per equivalent unit, and this is for conversion costs, multiplying that by our equivalent units for conversion costs, which we calculate to be 13,800 right here. So taking that information, then we're going to take and say $3 times our ending inventory gives us 69,000. Our cost per equivalent unit, which is $2.25, times our equivalent units of conversion cost of 13,008, gives us our 31,050. Adding the two together, we come to $100,050. Now, this is what the quiz should have been able to get from you. And as I went through it and realized the number of computations that you needed to have in order to successfully compute it, I realized that this particular problem is something that we need to go over again and again. And what I'm saying, as you're looking through this, when you are trying to determine the total cost and work in process, there are about 4 or 5 calculations that you'll need in order to do that. You'll need to first calculate your equivalent units for conversion costs. You'll need to calculate your conversion costs, and you need to calculate the cost per equivalent unit. That's the first thing. Next, you'll need to also deal with your material costs, because remember, conversion cost is going to be including direct labor and overhead. Material we haven't dealt with. So now we're going to deal with material costs. We're going to have to deal with the costs, which we have dealt with here, the total cost, and we're going to need to know what our number of units that we have to deal with, and we deal with them here. So again, handling the material costs in the same manner that we did the conversion costs, we want to calculate our total costs to be accounted for, our total units to be accounted for, in this case our equivalent units, and take and divide them together to come up with our per unit cost for materials. Being said, this particular problem, it has a number of different types of transactions that you'll need to do, or a number of calculations. The essence of this activity exhibits some important concepts. You will need to perform a number of calculations in order to compute the ending balance, or in this case, compute the costs associated or costs in the ending WIP account. The most important thing, I believe, is knowing that you have to account for your units first. You have to account for the dollars second, divide the two to come to a cost per unit. And this is going to be done 2 times, one for the conversion cost and the other for materials. Once you understand the process and knowing that you have to do the same thing, one for conversion costs and one for materials, then it makes much more sense once you start to compute the material costs that's in ending work in process, and the cost per equivalent unit for conversion costs. It all makes a little bit more sense. My hope with this particular example, breaking it into pieces like this, you can see how I had to calculate the WIP, or the equivalent units, and then the units itself, the costs associated with them. And you can see here the costs. And then by taking the two and dividing them together, I was able easily to get the cost per equivalent unit. And I did the same thing here, accumulating the cost to account for, and then accumulating the units, the equivalent units, dividing the two together to come up with my per unit cost. And then at the end, taking my ending units, multiplying by my rate, and then my cost per equivalent unit, multiplied by my, in this case, the 13,000 is going to be the equivalent units in work in process. So I'm hoping that this really does give you some food for thought and does allow you to see that sometimes the transactions require more than one computation. And as you can see, I think there might have been 6 computations in this one entry. So the final answer in this case is going to be the B. B is your answer.